Department of Journalism, and a sometimes dabbler in community journalism. And we have a very distinguished panel of alums who are going to bring a variety of perspectives to our topic. So starting at the far end, we've got Eric Ernst, Dan Schafer, Kevin Damas, Corinne Spiegel, and Scott Belisle. And I thought we'd keep things pretty simple, so I'm going to ask them, instead of me giving an introduction, to have them talk about themselves and to start with their connection and their experience with community journalism. We can start with you, Eric.
I'm Eric Ernst. I'm the promotion manager at Wisconsin Public Television. I graduated in 2002. As Miles, I'm sure, remembered, I was one of those diligent news and editorial students who only took the one PR class that was mandated and sat there with my arms crossed because I would never do PR work and then only have done PR work. But the caveat in that is that the PR work that I'm able to do at Wisconsin Public Television is actually much more focused on community engagement and supporting the community journalism work that we do at the station. And not only advancing that, but finding ways to connect communities across the state with that work, either through in-person engagement or online engagement.
I'm Dan Schafer. I graduated here in December 2008, which, as everyone knows, was the absolute best time to graduate as a journalist. Since then, I've most recently was working in Seattle at Seattle Magazine and Seattle Business Magazine as their digital managing editor. Before that, was a reporter at the Milwaukee Business Journal and an editor at Milwaukee Magazine. So obviously, everything that I've worked at is pretty local and community focused, particularly the city magazines, which I think in that sense is less about breaking news in places like Milwaukee Magazine and Seattle Magazine, and more like telling stories. So you're really trying to pull those stories out of the community.
I'm Kevin Damas, graduated in 2006. I've really spent most of my career in community journalism, pretty much. I guess almost 15 years now, going back to working part-time for the Northwestern, covering sports for them on the local high school beat, covering Omro and Winneconne and Ripon and towns like that. And then, my first, I guess, real job after graduation was working for a small daily in Huron, South Dakota. And I grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. I thought I knew what rural was. That's very rural. I mean, I covered 9-man football and covered towns that the only paved road was the main street going through the town. And so I got a pretty good sense of community journalism, I think, right away in my career, which is kind of nice. And then since then, I've come back to Wisconsin. I've been working for a lot of smaller weeklies and dailies. Just really got to get to know the fabric of the community and get to deal with a lot of issues. And then for the past 13 months, I've been editor of the Columbus Journal, weekly in Columbus, Wisconsin. And just do a little bit of everything there. Reporting, writing, taking photos, updating social media, just a little bit of everything. But definitely keeps you on your toes and makes you a well-rounded journalist.
So Corey Spiegel, I think I'm the only non-journalist here. So I went the ad PR route and graduated in '99 and have never done a lick of journalism since. Worked in the private sector for a few years on the marketing side and landed in local government in the suburbs of Phoenix, and then spent 7 years in the suburbs of Denver, and now I'm the city manager in Davenport, Iowa. So I am often the subject of many of your fodders.
I'm Scott Belisle. I work for the New London Hortonville Press Star newspaper. It's about a 35-minute drive away, small town. New London's about 7,300 people, and then it also serves Hortonville, which is less than 3,000. So definitely a micro, hyper-local beat that I have. So my earliest dive into community journalism was reading the comics page as a little kid, so not exactly, but so then as I was getting older and I actually started to read the news side of the newspaper a little more, paid attention to that, and in
high school, I started contributing a bit to our New London newspaper. I was on the cross country team, so I'd send in my write-ups of the meets, and I'd send in some of the coverage on the school events that I was a part of, which I guess is a massive conflict of interest technically, but they took it. And, so it was just a way of, I always took pride in our local hometown newspaper, and I wanted those areas that were not covered because the reporters were so stretched thin to get some exposure. So I did that, and then came to college here. I did a bunch of different things for the Advanced Titan. I was a reporter, news editor, and then I even dabbled in cartooning a little bit on the op-ed page. So then after that, graduated, and a few months before graduation, there just happened to be an opportunity, job opening at the New London newspaper, which is rare because for a small community newspaper, tiny staffs mean that people don't come and go all that often. So happened to seize it at the right moment. I put a lot of work on them because I interviewed in February and said I can be there in late May if that's okay. And so I think they had a pretty stressful 3 months while they were down a guy, but they managed. And yeah, been doing that ever since, and really like it and take pride in serving the community.
Yes, the next question I have for you is to ask you to talk a little bit about how community journalism is different from other kinds of journalism. What are the highs and the lows, the joys and the sorrows?
I think the highs are definitely getting positive feedback from the community. I mean, like when I cover sports, going to games and interviewing the coaches, and then writing the stories, and then going to the next game and hearing from maybe parents like, "Oh, that was a great story you had on my son or my daughter." I mean, things like that. You're not going to get from a major beat at a major paper. I mean, I'm sure Mike McCarthy isn't going up to the beat reporters of the Journal Sentinel saying, "Hey, great story," So I think the feedback it's nice.
Yeah, I think from my experience in Milwaukee, mostly is there's kind of a conversation that happens with community journalism, and whether you're like when I was at the Business Journal reporting on places like Harley and things like that, it would have kind of a national angle a lot of the time. Maybe our national site would pick it up, but for the people who you're writing about and their families might be losing their jobs, or they're or might be getting hired, one way or another. Obviously it really connects. So like I think that's what you really see with community journalism, is that it connects to the people who you see on a day-to-day basis.
In public media, there's an expectation that we're going to super serve these communities, but as a statewide public media outlet, it's a real challenge, and it makes me envious of folks who are able to focus on a community and be embedded within a community, because there's an expectation for us, but it's a real challenge. We do our best to be able to do that. But some recent examples, we have a reporter who's spent the last year and a half or so profiling people along the Mississippi River in the area where there's been a lot of challenges in rural communities like Pepin County and those types of areas, to really dig in beyond the sort of headlines that you hear about shifting political sands, but just what is the underlying piece of that. That takes a real investment, and I'm proud of our organization to make that type of an investment. But it's hard to do that place-based journalism on a statewide level. So we actually end up focusing more in the general term of community around like communities of veterans, those types, super serving the veterans community. That's something that I've been involved with. And the way that we do that is to take often national content, recently like Ken Burns' Vietnam documentary, and taking that into communities around the state and bringing together panels much like this of veterans, sharing a piece of that documentary, but making the main focus of those events being then turning back to the veterans and saying, would you like to share your story? And some of the most powerful moments that I've ever seen, we had an event in Madison last year where there was a scene in the documentary talking about the war protests back home, and one of our veterans actually said that when he came home, as many veterans did, my dad's a Vietnam veteran as well, and very similar, he came home and basically shut off the news. And it took until seeing that documentary in that moment to realize the role that protesters had, not in just in being rabble rousers, but actually in ending the war and bringing back so many of his fellow soldiers safely. And so there was a moment at that panel where a war protester stood up and was frustrated that we didn't have any war protesters on the panel. We only had veterans. And this particular veteran actually stood up and shared this story of apologizing for not realizing the role that he had played. And it was just that only powerful moment that you can have in those real life types of discussions. And that's where that type of work becomes really fulfilling.
I think from the community standpoint, and while as journalists you probably don't think of yourselves as the ombudsmans for the community, in many ways you are. And because I was the ad PR side, so much of so we have 3 TV stations and 2 daily newspapers in a city of 100,000. So it's a whole lot of media. And the media really controls how the community feels about itself. And that's really the power of community journalism, because if all you read about is crime and national politics, it can be a little bit of a depressing place. But if you hear about the kids who did really great things, or the Rhodes Scholars, or the stories about veterans, I mean, that's something that I think all Americans can tie to right now. It changes literally how you feel about this place you call home. And I think that's where the power of community journalism really comes in.
Like Kevin said, the feedback is really rewarding, knowing that you're serving your community, because obviously you're not going to be making a ton of money doing what you do. There are other professions that you could go into if you really wanted to, but so the hearing that the work you do matters is definitely a reward of its own. And then another opportunity to touch on with community journalism is that you're often, depending on what level of coverage you are, for example, at a hyper local newspaper like ours, we often get the opportunity to tell stories that if we don't step in and do it, then nobody else is going to. And that's not a knock on the people who cover larger areas. Like for Eric, you really don't have a reason to be coming to my little town every day and trying to tell the news of the day, besides the fact that there's not a ton going on there. But it is up to us to dig into it and find out the interesting things that are going on and the issues and all that. And oftentimes I'm surprised by the types of stories, like the controversies that will happen in our community, things like that every now and then, that I get a little surprised that they don't get picked up by the regional media, because some of it I'm like, wow, that was quite the fit that was going on, and then it doesn't get anywhere else. But that's just the people at the metros and all that. They have a lot of work to do. They've got really large geographic areas to cover, so it's up to the community journalists to step in. They aren't able to be everywhere at once.
And so then what are some of the challenges? We've all talked about the positive sides. I'm sure there are some special challenges that you face as well.
Should I jump in? Well, definitely one of the biggest challenges not in the climate we have now is shrinking newsroom staffs, unfortunately, and media companies cutting back on the resources. In my case, I'm kind of a one-person operation. I cover the news, and I don't lay out the paper. We have designers in Madison that do that, luckily. But I'm out taking photos and doing reporting, and then getting submitted content from readers, and then going through that and editing photos and stuff like that too. So, I think it does hurt news coverage in a way, because I would love to have even another part-time reporter, but I just don't have that luxury. I mean, so I think the news coverage does suffer a little bit in the smaller communities because, I mean, if I could divide myself in two, I would, but I can't. So that's definitely one of the challenges I see. And another one I had is being unbiased in your reporting too, because in these small communities, you want to definitely connect to people in the community, but you have to kind of keep a little bit of safe distance. You don't want to, I mean, be best friends with them and, you know, go out for a beer every night with them, but you want to build your sources. But I mean, if there's a controversy that occurs in town, it's your job to report it. You're the watchdog for the community, and you know, you have to be the trusted source for your readers. And if you're afraid to cover something that's controversial because you're buddies with, you know, the city administrator, so that is an example, but I'm just, you know, it makes it difficult. So
I think the flip side of that is, if you are always attacking me, I can guarantee you my 1,000 employees will never ever talk to you. And so I think that's one of the challenges, probably less on my side, more on the content side, is that I don't need you anymore. 15 years ago when I started my career, having the TV station or the newspaper come do a story was a really big deal. Now I have 5 Facebook pages that reach 30, 40,000 people a day, just like that. And I can do it instantaneously with my own staff. And so I think having a fair partnership is good, because when your sources will shut down on you, that's equally dangerous. And so that's going to be a tough line to walk in terms of being able to work your sources, but at the same point, not burn those bridges too.
Yeah, I think, you know, like Kevin said, that the shrinking size of newsrooms is obviously a huge challenge. I think it makes everybody who's a journalist now have to do multiple jobs. You have to be a reporter and a social media manager and a photographer and an editor and, you know, a web producer and all sorts of different jobs all at the same time. So in a perfect world, those would all be separate jobs, and we'd have everybody, more people working in the news media than in PR. No. But you know, it does present challenges. And I think another thing that, you know, I've seen sometimes at city magazines is that, you know, maybe sometimes they'll want to dial back on more serious content. So if you want to do a long, more investigative piece that might take some time, might take some resources, and might not give you the big splashy headline, you know, that is a harder sell for publishers nowadays. Whereas, you know, the 50 best places to eat in Milwaukee is going on the cover. So I think that, you know, is something that I've tried to push for in a lot of my different roles and things like that, is that more, you know, more serious, more hard-hitting coverage. But sometimes that's not what gets you the likes and the retweets these days. So that's definitely a challenge as well, just the type of content that people are willing to produce.
I'll concur on the resources side of things, but I'll sort of flip it then to the opportunities and the ways to, one of the ways that we try to overcome that is a good amount of our work is in forging partnerships so that we're able to sort of leverage the journalism and documentary work that we're doing and get it into the communities with partners. Libraries are the greatest partners that we have. They're the ambassadors for the community, as well as vetting high quality content and not allowing sort of schlock into their space. So libraries are great partners. We obviously partner with public radio stations around the state, but also commercial media. It's not unusual for when we're doing statewide debates for elections for us to partner with the Journal Sentinel or newspapers in local communities to both collect, both produce the debates and the journalism around it, but to collect the stories that will help inform the questions that are posed to candidates. So partnerships really become essential in this environment.
And to kind of going off of some of the points that Kevin and Corin made here, like the relationships in a small community, you have to be attentive to those while also being able to walk the line of still telling the news. It's a little, I guess, funny that I'm a journalist to begin with, because I'm the type of person that doesn't love confrontation with people. I love to get along with everybody and make sure that everybody's happy. So it pushes me a little sometimes to get out of my comfort zone and say, we got to do this story on this hot issue going on, because I'm not just gonna bury it under the rug. A lot of people want to know this, and so that's just kind of have to step up and do your job. Sometimes, like when I need to go to two different sides of the story, I'll kind of make sure that they know that this isn't me personally coming out to get them. This is just wanting to get their viewpoint represented in an issue that's going on in the community. And then also with the small town relationships, you can sometimes get the people. Grace and I were talking earlier about how you will sometimes get the people who say, I saw a deer in my backyard, and they want that to become the news. You have to say,
Was it albino?
yeah, I guess if you're a good journalist, you'll ask those questions first. But sometimes you just got to find ways to politely say no while not burning them off forever and making them cancel their subscription and hate you. So, yeah.
So are there tips or suggestions or things that you've learned about building community? I mean, how do you do that?
I think in a bigger city that you can have where that have a lot of media, like you mentioned, the city that you're in has a lot of media. I think it's really important to read everybody who's putting out any kind of content that's covering what you're doing, so that you understand what conversation is already happening. I think that's super important. And then I think, nowadays, as a way to build a community, I think it is, or build a connection with your readers. It's important to have that conversation with them on social media and online and however capacity that is. I'm a big Twitter user, so I think I've had a lot of good feedback and back and forth with readers through that, and I think because of that, when I was covering certain topics like like the arena debate in Milwaukee, I had a lot of people coming to me when news would break, and they would ask me, okay, what does this mean? And I could have that conversation publicly and kind of help people out understand the issue and use, maybe sources or information that I might have from reporting on it for a certain amount of time. So I think that certainly helps nowadays, to just kind of have that constant dialogue with the people who you're serving with your work.
For us, the two main keys are building trust and listening. But the real challenge in that is not just saying you're going to listen, but actually proving that you're listening. So when we make any of our hometown stories documentaries, where we go into a community and are going to tell the history of that community, which we've done here in Oshkosh and other cities, we start that process through a series of community listening sessions where we invite people in, and we open the meeting by saying, we're not going to talk for the next hour. We're going to listen to you, and those stories are going to inform what we're going to do. And the most powerful example of having to prove that out was in our veterans work. When we did our own Wisconsin Vietnam War Stories project almost 10 years ago now, we started with those listening sessions, and most of those listening sessions started with rooms of veterans with their arms folded, basically, as we walked in, saying, what fresh hell is this now? And then having to sit there and build that trust. And my favorite story from that is that one of the participants in that documentary, Don Weber, who's a businessman now in La Crosse, owns a major international healthcare company, was a veteran and has just a horrifying story of being part of a company where he lost most of his folks. And he ended up, it took a lot of trust building, but he shared that story in the documentary. But then when it came time to share the documentary, and we did community screenings and our LZ Lambeau welcoming home Vietnam veterans event at Lambeau Field, he, even though he was a major funder, he didn't attend. He wasn't comfortable at the time. But then he watched the results of that and how powerful that community engagement was. Fast forward about 3 or 4 years later, we did a screening on Veterans Day in La Crosse of all of our veterans programs. And not only did he attend, he invited all of the veterans that work at his organization to come to that screening, and he introduced it with a 15-minute presentation sharing his story that he had never done with his veterans. And that's the trust building, and it doesn't come instantly and it doesn't come easily, but we're all real eager to say that we're listening to you, but saying it isn't what's important. You need to prove that you actually are and act on that.
Yeah, I think I can kind of piggyback on Eric's point. Yeah, you have to show that you care, and that you're invested in the story. And I think that goes a long way too, because I think if you're not really caring and kind of packing it in, I think readers will figure it out. And so I think caring about your subject and showing interest in the things that you're covering. I mean, you might not always be the most interested in it or know that much about it, but it's your job to, get to know about it and report on it. And then, social media, I think, is big now too. I mean, I've gotten tips for stories from Facebook at some really good stories too that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So yeah, I think that connection is big too.
I would say building those relationships, because there are 1,000,001 stories, and people are more than happy to tell them to you, and it does take listening. The flip side is if we have a young reporter come in, regardless of print or TV, and I have to teach you how government works, that's probably the last time I'm going to meet with you. And so being prepared when you come in to be able to make productive use of that time is really important, because if you come in with, you can ask me hard questions all day long. It's inevitable. We're a government. We're going to screw up. It's what we do. But we also do a lot of really good things. And so as long as we can have a meaningful conversation about both of those, we have reporters who are great, and they get access to things that are great for their viewers or their participants, that if they were just really clinical about it, it'd be like, okay, well, that's a crime scene from 300 feet away, instead of, oh, that's the kid who stole my car's face. Those are those kinds of things that bring it to life.
I think just reporting on the issues that are local or are important to your community and staying true to those roots is important, and also being a listener too. Sometimes there are days where I get caught in the middle of a long-winded interview that's not really going anywhere, and I start to get a little antsy and think, oh, I really could be back at the office getting other things done, but I try to wait it out and let them know that I appreciate hearing what they're saying, and try to still turn it into something that can be usable and make everybody happy and all that. But I definitely consider myself, I enjoy the listening aspect much more than the speaking, getting up in front of everybody aspect. So I think that's where I am the happiest, is just being either in an interview or at a council meeting or whatever, and just kind of sitting back and watching what's going on and letting everybody know afterward, giving them the news.
So now it's crystal ball time, and time for you to tell us what's the future of community journalism. What are the trends that are affecting things, and where are things going to be in the next 5 or 10 years?
Assuming there is a future for
Yeah.
No, I think I think we're seeing a lot of where things are going with things migrating online and things like that. But I think you're going to see some of the more traditional things stay as well, because the foundational journalistic principles, those things that you have in your toolbox from college, are going to remain the same. So I think asking the right questions, being in the right places, following the right things, knowing the right people. Those things are going to stay the same, but I think maybe the way and manner in which you consume that might change. And of course, it's all going to be through here as opposed to in print a lot of the time. That I think we all recognize at this point.
We have an office bet on when the last print paper in the region will come because it's probably in the future. So
So I think that's no shock to anybody, but I think those foundational principles of what journalism is they're gonna carry through no matter what the medium you're reading them on is.
So you think things will grow? Like your experience has been kind of in niche publications. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
And do you think that's a healthy field? Is that going to grow?
Some of them will. Some of them. I mean, the business news reporting, I think, is was growing probably the fastest out of any place that I've been. There's a huge market for that, and I think is still untapped in a lot of ways. But maybe the city magazine stuff, I think, is going to be tough. I think, I think a lot of the stuff that city magazines focus on, whether it's food or travel or things like that, people are getting from, just searching Instagram hashtags or stuff like that. If they're, if somebody's visiting Seattle for the weekend, are they going to go through Seattle Magazine? Okay, what's their best places to visit issue and find that? I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's going to be tough. Unless, they give readers a reason to subscribe. And I think, part of that community journalism that you're talking about, that reason to subscribe is the stuff that has an impact and does things like talk to veterans all over the state and different ways that will really count and report on the way things are changing in people's different communities. So. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
So I think from a print standpoint, I think video is a little different, that content generation. But from a print standpoint, it's not fully disrupted. The market's not fully gone where it needs to go. They haven't figured out how to quantify where the profit margins are. And I think the industry has cut. Well, you can only cut so far. And so probably in the next 5-year window, it's going to be disrupted. And whatever the new normal is, which probably won't involve paper, will kind of emerge. And then there will be a whole new field from there that we don't see yet.
I don't think that the nut has been cracked yet, but I really do think the future is in the type of nonprofit journalism work that you're doing here in Oshkosh and that we're seeing like at the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism and public television and public radio, but some sort of nonprofit model that's more sustainable than the corporate model that is shrinking because at some point shrink too far, it's an essential part of our civilization, and it will find a way. But I think it's fortunately or unfortunately, it's going to be in some new form around a nonprofit collective. I can say from our side of things, our membership numbers are at the highest that they've ever been. We're right about to crack 70,000 members statewide, which is a number we've never had before. And so much of the feedback that comes along with that are people that are saying that it's because of the journalism that we're able to provide. And so not that we're going to be the answer or public radio is going to be the answer, but I think it's in that nonprofit space, if I had to guess, where community journalism, it needs to live. And I think that's how it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think and I hope there will always be an appetite for community journalism, and kind of what Scott was saying earlier. We do cover the things that bigger outlets just can't get to, and it's. It might seem like small things, but people like to see their school board covered every week, and the city council meetings, and they like to see how the budget's looking like, how much I'm going to pay in taxes, and and the local sports. I've had experiences covering a football team every game, and they get I'll be there every game, and then once they get to the playoffs, I'll see the reporters from the bigger outlets, State Journal and Journal Sentinel, because they're at state now, so we have to cover them. Where, hey, I'm here every week, you know. So I think it's just something that readers aren't going to get at the bigger media outlets, and I don't know. I would just hope that that doesn't go away. I don't think it will. But.
Yeah. It's great to hear Eric say that the support is so high right now for journalism, and my hope is that'll continue. I think my generation, we kind of grew up at a time where we were blessed in the form that we could just pirate all the music we want and get onto news sites without paywalls and all this stuff, and now it's starting to reverse, but going to more paywalls for the news. But people are also paying every month for Netflix and Amazon subscriptions and Hulu and all those sorts of things, and I think for the most part they're paying to download music and all that stuff. So maybe the generation below us will kind of be taught that things aren't always free, like the older generations I think were also taught, but then I kind of was born in an age where things were a little different because of the missteps of publishers, and we just shoved everything online for free. But the hope is that maybe people kind of be obligated to support that a little more, and they'll see the need for it.
I'm going to open things up for questioning from the audience in just a moment, but I have one last question, which has to do with how you got to where you are now. And I have kind of a couple of sub-questions like, did you expect this? Was this a surprise? And then finally, what advice would you have to students who are coming along to prepare themselves for the brave new world?
I did not expect it, as I said when I led off. But I can actually speak to a particular experience here that I think led to where I am. My senior year, working at the Advanced Titan, which I did for all 4 years, which was hugely valuable. I pursued and got an interview with Fred Rogers in the year after he retired from television, and it was shortly after September 11th, and just wanted to get his perspective because I thought that college students could also take a little bit of his wisdom at the time. And I'm still confident that having done that interview, which ended up being a full conversation with him, much more interviewing me than me interviewing him, actually at least got my application in the door, and I attribute my job in public television to that particular experience here.
Oh, are we going right down the line this time?
Sure, why not?
Jumping around. Okay. Well, I also worked at the Advanced Titan, and I think one of the things that I did there that really helped me along was that I did a whole bunch of different jobs. So I started as as an opinion columnist, and then I was the opinion editor, and then I was a news writer, and then I was also the paper's first web editor. And so I think that really having that, kind of background and kind of some sort of digital web production aspect of it gave me another set of tools in the toolbox to really get to that. So my first internship was as a web producer. I've been a digital editor at now 2 different publications. So I think, doing a lot of different things and having a lot of different experiences at the AT, and in Miles' web reporting class, was definitely a big deal. And I think, you have to be persistent too. I think having graduated right into the worst recession that we had seen in 80 years, a lot of the people that I worked with at the AT didn't end up in journalism. Not that they have bad jobs or anything like that, or not using the things that they learned here. But I think, you had to be persistent if you wanted to have a career in it, and you had to try a lot of different things. I guess one thing that would surprise me in where I went was having a number of jobs doing business reporting, because when I was in college, I was kind of had that rebellious anti-corporate mindset, and then of course 2 of the jobs I had right out of college were business reporting. So, but maybe that'll help me take some CEOs to task from time to time.
Yeah, you talked about like surprises or if it, well, yeah, I think for me, when I came here, I kind of had one track mind. I wanted to cover sports. I wanted to be a sports writer, be the next big columnist that, or work for Sports Illustrated. And I kind of fulfilled that dream for a while, and then recession hit, and I was kind of not really forced, but like working part time, I had to pick up any assignments I could get just to make some money, and so I started covering more news, and now, fast forward about 10 years later, I still cover a little sports. It's still kind of my passion, but mostly I'm all news now. And back when I was in school, I kind of looked at my classmates weird. They're like, I want to cover hard news. I want to cover crime. And I'm like, I want no part of that. And then about 2 years ago, I covered my first homicide trial, and that was a great experience. And now I'm, kind of fascinated by the criminal justice system and violent crime and just, everything with that. But back when I was here, I never would have thought I would have covered crime or anything like that. So, and just as far as the experience, I would say to students, take any experience that you can, because, that's something that was really ingrained in us through the professors here when I was here. Take internships, work for the AT, work for the Northwestern if you can. And I'm sure that hasn't changed now. So, especially with all the new digital media stuff, learn that, because it's going to become valuable down the road. So.
I didn't know my profession existed when I was here, so I couldn't have foretold that. But I will say, across the board, and again, being ad PR, I use all of that. So the social media metrics, we measure which of our crime stories goes how fast, or, ooh, we're getting a Portillo. Did you know 222,000 people on Facebook care about that in a 24-hour period? Like, that's the kind of stuff we're actually watching in government, and you probably wouldn't think we are. At the same point, we publish all of our council meetings, and now all 17 boards and commissions go right to YouTube. So we're pushing out as much content as we can for our citizenry, because it's really easy for us now. I think in the days of old, it was very expensive. I still run government TV. We're talking about decommissioning that, because having landline cable service is, again, something of the past. And so even in a government setting, all of those classes come into our daily life, because even if there is a scandal, okay, how are we going to deal with what this says and how the city's going to respond or not, or who's going to release the statement, all of that. So PR class is alive and well most days at work.
It's really cool that they record every single meeting over there. Wish I had that ability to see that over in my town. But yeah, I actually got my job. I was hired as a part-time, well, not part-time, partially as a sports reporter, and I don't know anything about sports, so that was pretty a lot of learning to begin with, but I don't think I would take it back. I think that I learned how to get out of my comfort zone and report on topics that required some learning, since I pretty much was cross country and track were the only things that I ever did myself, and those are rather self-explanatory. So to have to report on ball games where there are rules and all that stuff to learn it's a little difficult. But I think, as it's been said before, definitely joining the AT, if you haven't already, is a great opportunity, and trying to get immersed in as much areas of it as you can. I don't know if when I was working for the AT, they kind of had their separate staff photographers and separate reporters and all that, and so I never really got hands-on photography experience. But I don't know, things are different now. But if you have the ability to pick up a camera and actually photograph your own stories and all that, because that also would have saved me so much stress in college when we were depending on a different person to supply the photos, and then you find out Wednesday night at 6, nope, they didn't take them. But community journalism is all, it's about being able to be a master of all trades and pick it all up and do it at once. So if you can work a video camera on your phone, and if you can have a decent digital camera to take your own pictures and kind of envision the photo package and news package in your head as you're doing your own story and all that, it's just really great to learn a little bit of everything. So Angie, she's a coworker of mine. She works at the County Post, but her job is the same way. She does all of her own stuff, photography, writing, video, and all that. So speak to that too, that it's great to be able to do everything, not just writing or not just photography.
All right. So, any questions from the audience? Yes.
How do you decide what to cover? There's probably things going on even in the smallest communities every single day, at all hours of the day. So how do you prioritize or pick? Because obviously coverage is, you're going to miss something. So how do you try to spread your time between small steps?
Well, I mean, there's certain things that I feel like you always have to, like, especially if you're covering one or two small communities, school board, city council, and some other meetings. Sometimes you look at the agenda and just see, oh, they're talking about this. That's kind of a big hot topic. Then, I'd go to that. And then if a lot of times in these small communities, there's a festival that's huge, and maybe that's their one big event of the year. And it's like, you better be at that to take photos and to report on that, because if you don't cover it, you're going to hear about it from your readers, and it's not going to be pretty. So so I'd say the typical bigger meetings are more important, and local festivals, and if there's a major issue going on too, you want to make sure you cover that too. Yeah.
Church picnics.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes that too.
Yeah, it's if you can get that mindset, Dr. Kulak told us this once in class, if you can walk around in your community on a daily basis and just think to yourself, that could be a story, and just be really curious and always aware of your surroundings, or asking, I wonder why this is the way it is. That's a great.
I was just wondering, in small communities, that you were saying that you had to be very careful not to make enemies, etc. But when you have issues like the gay marriage or the Me Too movement, I'm wondering how you go about covering both sides of an issue like that
Yeah.
without antagonizing the tribal movement.
Yeah, for sure. Because sometimes it almost becomes like he said, she said type journalism, where it's just somebody's mad about this. Now let's run over to the other side and see what they think. And it's a question that you always kind of have to wrestle with and see how can you improve it. I guess since we're more hyper local, I actually haven't really done Me Too coverage, because fortunately we haven't had a situation in our town where we found out that somebody was harassing another person or anything like that. Our publisher really wants us to stick to local in the community, which you could always map or localize an issue, but just a lot of what I've covered has been more like city government and school happenings and all that, and so I guess that doesn't answer the question too much, but yeah, if there's obviously we would touch on it if it were something like if there were a big impact in our own community, or if something in DC had a trickle down effect where somebody in our town was impacted by it. But otherwise, we just think that people can already find great coverage on those types of topics in their national media, that we try to make sure that we give them what they're looking for in their local sports and city news and all that first and foremost. And rely on the professionals at the national level to, I guess, guide those dialogues on those important issues.
I think it's also important to kind of keep the big picture in mind when you're covering those type of issues, because you might get into something where there's might be a little bit of back and forth between, you know, a war of words of sorts or something like that. But if you keep like the bigger issues and the bigger picture in mind, I find those kind of issues can be a little bit less prickly to cover, I guess.
I grew up in a